These are 8 medical professionals, sometimes called angels of death, who turned medicine itself into a murder weapon. Across 200 years and 2 continents, they killed patients, strangers, colleagues, and infants, and almost none of them were stopped by the system built to catch them. They were stopped by a suspicious daughter, a stubborn taxi driver, a night shift nurse who refused to look away. Doctors and nurses hold a unique kind of power. We hand them our bodies, our trust, and our benefit of the doubt. Each of these 8 discovered the same terrible secret, that this trust is the perfect camouflage. This is 200 years of medical murder, told in order, so you can see the pattern the system kept missing. We begin in the 1890s with the man they called the Lambeth Poisoner. Thomas Neal Cream had a medical degree from McGill University and a habit that should have ended his career before it began. His patients kept dying of strychnine poisoning. In 1881, an Illinois court convicted him of murdering a patient named Daniel Stott, whose epilepsy remedy cream had laced with poison. He was sentenced to life in Joliet prison. And here is the first system failure in our story: he didn't serve it. His sentence was commuted, and in 1891, a convicted murderer with a medical license walked free and sailed for London. He settled in Lambeth, among the poorest streets of the city, and began offering pills to young women working as prostitutes. The pills were strychnine. Ellen Donworth died in agony. Matilda Clover died next, her death certified as natural, a detail worth remembering, because it will repeat for 100 more years. Alice Marsh and Emma Shrivel died the same night, poisoned by the same hand. What finally exposed Cream wasn't medical oversight, it was his own compulsion for attention. He wrote blackmail letters accusing other men of his murders, letters that mentioned details only the killer could know. He was hanged at Newgate in November 1892. The lesson of Cream is the founding lesson of this entire story. The system had already convicted him once, and it still handed him back his victims. At almost the same moment, across the Atlantic, a doctor was building a hotel with rooms designed for killing. Herman Webster Mudgett, known to history as H.H. Holmes, graduated from the University of Michigan's medical school, where he had already learned the trade that would define him: stealing cadavers and disfiguring them for insurance fraud. In Chicago in the early 1890s, he built the building later mythologized as the Murder Castle, with its legendary tales of soundproofed rooms, gas lines, and chutes leading to a basement. When the World's Fair came to Chicago in 1893, guests checked into Holmes's building and vanished. His medical training gave him something no ordinary killer had: a marketplace. Skeletons and anatomical specimens were in constant demand at medical schools, and Holmes knew exactly how to prepare a body so that no one would ask where it came from. He sold his victims to science. After his arrest, Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but he was a compulsive liar, and several of his supposed victims turned out to be alive. Historians today can confirm 9. That gap between myth and evidence matters because the truth is disturbing enough. A licensed physician industrialized murder, and the anatomy trade paid him for it. He was hanged in Philadelphia in May 1896, and his final scam was his own grave. He asked to be buried in concrete so that no one could do to his body what he had done to so many others. Half a century later, in occupied Paris, a doctor turned the darkest moment in Europe into a hunting ground. Marcel Petiot was a respected French physician with a political career, a wife, and a house at 21 Rue Le Sueur. During the Nazi occupation, he offered desperate people, many of them Jewish families, a way out. For a fee, his secret network would smuggle them to South America. They came to his house at night, carrying everything they owned. Petiot gave them an injection, which he called a vaccination required for travel. Then he watched them die. There was no network. There was no escape route. There was only the fee, the suitcases, and a basement. In March 1944, neighbors complained about foul black smoke pouring from the chimney. Police and firemen entered the house and found human remains in the furnace and a pit of quicklime. Petiot's defense was breathtaking. He claimed he was a resistance fighter and that the bodies were Nazi collaborators he had executed for France. A French court convicted him of 26 murders. He went to the guillotine in May 1946. KTO's case adds a new element to the pattern. The medical killer doesn't just exploit individual trust, he exploits chaos. When institutions collapse, the man with the doctor's bag is the last authority left standing and no one checks his credentials. Our fourth case never went to prison at all, and that is exactly why he belongs on this list. John Bodkin Adams was a general practitioner in the wealthy English seaside town of Eastbourne. Between 1946 and 1956, more than 160 of his patients died in comas or unexplained circumstances, and 132 of them had named Dr. Adams in their wills. He collected money, silverware, even a Rolls Royce. In 1957, he was tried for the murder of Edith Alice Morrell, an elderly widow he had kept sedated on heroin and morphine. The trial was a sensation and a disaster. The prosecution's case collapsed. A second murder charge was controversially withdrawn, and Adams was acquitted. He was struck off the medical register for prescription offenses, a matter handled by the General Medical Council, then quietly reinstated 4 years later. He died a free man in 1983. Many historians and detectives who reviewed the files remain convinced that Eastbourne had a serial killer working out of a doctor's surgery for a decade. But the trial produced something else, something with consequences to this day: the legal doctrine that a doctor easing a dying patient's suffering is not committing murder, even if the treatment shortens life. A principle written to protect compassionate medicine became, in the wrong hands, a shield. And 40 years later, in another quiet English town, another family doctor would hide behind exactly that shield. His name was Harold Shipman, and he is the reason this channel exists. Shipman was Britain's most beloved kind of doctor, the old-fashioned general practitioner who made house calls. His confirmed victims date from 1975 to 1998, though the official inquiry suspected he may have begun as early as 1971. He injected his patients, mostly elderly women, with lethal doses of diamorphine, then signed their death certificates himself, listing natural causes. The official inquiry, formerly known as the Shipman Inquiry, which also drove sweeping reforms to UK death certification and the oversight role of the General Medical Council, confirmed 215 victims and estimated the true total at around 250, making him the most prolific serial killer in modern history. A taxi driver counted his dying customers. A fellow general practitioner went to the police. Nothing worked until Shipman forged the will of Kathleen Grundy, a former mayoress of Hyde, and her daughter, a solicitor, refused to accept it. We told Shipman's full story in our previous episode, how he killed, why no one stopped him for 27 years, and the clumsy typewritten document that finally ended it. If you haven't seen it, it's the essential companion to this one. For our pattern, Shipman proves the central point. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was killing in plain sight, protected by a single signature, his own on a death certificate no one ever checked. While Shipman was killing quietly in England, an American doctor was demonstrating another flaw in the system. It has no memory. Michael Swango was a physician whose career reads like an indictment of every hospital that employed him. As a medical student and intern in the early 1980s, patients on his rotations died so often that colleagues joked about it. In 1985, he was convicted not of murder, but of poisoning his fellow paramedics' coffee and donuts with arsenic. He served 2 years, and then he simply went back to medicine. He falsified his records, changed states, and he kept getting hired, because no national system existed to flag him. When American hospitals finally grew suspicious, Swango did what Cream had done a century earlier. He changed continents. He took hospital posts in Zimbabwe, where patients began dying of unexplained paralysis. When authorities there closed in, he arranged a job in Saudi Arabia and was arrested in 1997 during a layover on American soil. Investigators estimate Swango poisoned as many as 60 people, though he was convicted of far fewer. He pleaded guilty in 2000 and sits today in America's most secure federal prison. Swango's lesson is bureaucratic, and that makes it more frightening, not less. Every institution that caught him chose to pass the problem along rather than raise the alarm. A quiet resignation was always easier than a scandal. He was not alone in that pattern. In Germany, a nurse named Niels Hogel would do the same thing a decade later, moving between hospitals after arousing suspicion, ultimately confirmed responsible for 85 murders and possibly many more. Different country, different decade, identical institutional failure? That exact mechanism, the quiet resignation, is how a nurse in New Jersey became one of the most prolific killers in American history. Charles Cullen worked as a critical care nurse for 16 years, moving through 9 hospitals and a nursing home across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. At nearly every stop, patients died of unexplained drug overdoses, digoxin, and insulin, medications Cullen was seen accessing without reason. Hospital after hospital grew suspicious, and hospital after hospital did the same thing. They let him resign, gave him a neutral reference, and said nothing, terrified of lawsuits. So he moved on and killed again. Cullen was finally caught in 2003 when a colleague, a nurse named Amy Logdren, who agreed to wear a wire, helped investigators build the case against her own friend at genuine personal risk. He confessed to up to 40 murders. Investigators officially linked him to 29 deaths, and some experts believe the real number may run far higher, possibly into the hundreds. He is serving multiple consecutive life sentences. New Jersey subsequently passed legislation known as the Cullen Law, requiring healthcare employers to report suspicious resignations and share employment records, a rare example of a healthcare serial killer's crimes actually producing structural reform. If Swango exposed the system's lack of memory, Cullen exposed its lack of courage. 9 institutions suspected him. 9 institutions protected themselves instead of their aides. The killing stopped only when one individual decided her patients mattered more than her employer's legal exposure. Which brings us to the most recent case and the most contested. In August 2023, a British neonatal nurse named Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering 7 infants and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital. A further attempted murder conviction at retrial in 2024 brought the total to 7, and she was given whole life orders, a conviction her legal team continues to challenge, with experts publicly disputing the medical evidence. Whatever the appeals ultimately decide, the institutional story is already documented and already familiar. Consultants raised concerns about the pattern of deaths, and hospital managers were slow to act on them. A delay examined in painful detail by the Thirlwall Inquiry, the formal public investigation into how those concerns were handled. 130 years after Matilda Clover's murder was certified as natural causes, the questions in that Chester neonatal unit were the same ones this entire story keeps asking. Who is watching the people we trust the most? And when the numbers look wrong, who has the courage to say so out loud? 8 cases, 200 years, 1 pattern. The weapon is never really the syringe, the pill, or the prescription pad. The weapon is trust, the deference we grant to a white coat, and the deference institutions grant to their own. Cream was freed by the system that convicted him. Holmes was paid by the anatomy trade. Petiot thrived on chaos. Adams walked. Shipman signed his own victims' death certificates. Swango was passed along. Cullen was allowed to resign 9 times. In every case, ordinary people saw the pattern first, and the system saw it last. That is what this channel investigates. The dark side of medical history, the killers, the cover-ups, the cures that harmed, and the deaths that were never properly explained. If you want to see how deep this pattern goes, start with our full investigation into Harold Shipman, the doctor who killed 250 patients, and subscribe because the next case file is already open.